Why do lawyers defend criminals? A netizen replied, I am a lawyer, and a few days ago, I took on a case. It was about a traffic accident where a pregnant woman, 8 months along, was hit and killed. The insurance compensation was sufficient, but the deceased's family refused to sign the letter of understanding. The day before the trial, the deceased's husband suddenly approached me, asking me to defend the other party as not guilty. Our law firm isn't very large, primarily providing legal consultancy and advisory services for small and medium-sized enterprises. A few days ago, Mr. Wang, the owner of a long-term partner trading company, suddenly came to my office, saying there was an urgent case he wanted me to take. Seeing his poor complexion, I poured him a glass of water and asked him to explain slowly. It turned out that their company's driver had killed someone in a car accident 3 days prior. What made the case particularly unique was that the deceased was a pregnant woman, 8 months along. I asked about the basic situation, such as the driver's state at the time, if there was any drunk driving, and other conditions. What was the road condition like? Was there a red light violation? Most importantly, did the driver flee the scene? Mr. Wang immediately answered. The driver hadn't been drinking, and the accident occurred on a road in a suburban area. There were no traffic lights or crosswalks on that road, so it wasn't a red light violation. Additionally, the speed limit on that road was 80 kilometers per hour, and the vehicle was within that limit. It was raining heavily at the time, and the wet road caused the driver to lose control. After the accident, the driver immediately got out of the car, called the police, and dialed 120 emergency services. After hearing Mr. Wen's explanation, I understood the situation. Although I felt deep sympathy for the victim, the case itself was quite clear, so I took it on. Traffic accidents causing death without fleeing the scene are punishable by a maximum of 3 years imprisonment. If we can prove that the driver did not violate any traffic regulations or obtain the victim's family's forgiveness, the sentence will be even lower, or possibly not guilty. Mr. Wang seemed relieved, finally taking a sip of water and leaning back in his chair. That's good. Rest assured, Attorney Dao, there will be no issues with compensation. The company's vehicle has third-party insurance coverage of 3 million yuan, 7 million, the highest standard for traffic accident death compensation in this area. I added. Mr. Wang looked even more relaxed, and his complexion seemed to improve, even pulling out a cigarette to offer me. Sai, the driver, Xiao Fan, has been with our company for many years. Otherwise, I wouldn't have come to you so urgently. He's usually very careful, but who could have expected this to happen? I smiled at him to show my understanding. Attorney Dao, I'll leave the letter of understanding, and the follow-up matters to you. We're not sure what to say if we get involved. After speaking, Mr. Wang got up to leave, and his office would coordinate the following procedures with me. I escorted him out, feeling like I had forgotten something. Just as we were about to leave, I remembered. Oh, Mr. Wang, was there any witness to the accident? Was the incident captured by a dashcam or surveillance camera? If we can prove that the driver did not violate traffic rules, even without a letter of understanding, we could potentially exempt him from criminal responsibility. No, Mr. Wang stopped in his tracks. That road is quite remote, with few passers-by and no cameras. As for the dashcam, it was coincidentally broken for the past few days, and I was planning to have Xiao Fang replace it. I noticed a brief hesitation in Mr. Wen's expression when he mentioned this. In our profession, we don't ask unnecessary questions. Although Mr. Wen's expression seemed odd, I didn't pursue it further. Dashcam footage can easily determine speed, and if it says it didn't exceed 80 kilometers per hour, then it didn't. The footage was gone. So be it. Given the current situation, I just needed to get the family's letter of understanding. After Mr. Wang left, I reviewed the information he had provided. The driver's name was Fan Ping, 26 years old, but they had been working at Mr. Wen's company for 8 years. No wonder Mr. Wang personally came to me. Fan Ping was probably one of his early employees when the company was first established. Moreover, Fan Ping had no prior criminal record, which would be a positive factor in sentencing. The deceased was Zhang Yan, 28 years old, previously an accountant at a small company. Currently on maternity leave, Zhang Yan was a local, an only child, with her parents still alive. However, her mother's health seemed poor and bedridden for years. As for Zhang Yan's husband, Wu Xiaoyu, he was a delivery driver. They rented a house on the outskirts, less than 2 kilometers from the accident site. It was said that Zhang Yan had just finished a prenatal checkup and was on her way home by bus when the accident occurred. After reviewing the materials, I couldn't help but sigh. It was clear that this family was not well off, and Zhang Yan's death must have been a huge blow to them. From a case perspective, families in such economic conditions might be easier to persuade for a letter of understanding. But I was wrong. I called Wu Xiaoyu first, and the phone rang for a long time before it was answered. The background noise seemed empty. I identified myself and asked if he was Wu Xiaoyu. After a long pause, I heard the sound of a vehicle passing by, followed by a deep reply. "You're looking for me." Why? I briefly explained my identity and that Mr. One had entrusted me to communicate with him. But before I could finish, the call was cut off. I tried calling again, but he wouldn't answer or blocked my number. For 2 days, I couldn't have a proper conversation with Wu Xiaoyu. Even using a different number, he would hang up immediately. After hearing my voice and blocked the number, I realized I was dealing with a tough case. But this is common in our work. On the third evening, I went to Zhang Yan's home. Standing in front of a dilapidated suburban house, I knocked on the door for a long time without any response. Peeking through the crack, I saw it was dark inside, indicating no one was home. A neighbor opened the door and asked who I was looking for. I identified myself as the lawyer entrusted with the case. "Looking for Wu Xiaoyu." The neighbor scrutinized me, then shook his head. "You should go back. He hasn't been home for days." I felt a strange sensation. I had encountered many dead dodgers who avoided me, but never a victim's family avoiding me. Regardless, the deceased was gone, and the issue had to be faced and resolved. I didn't understand Wu Xiaoyu's mindset, but felt it would be difficult to make progress with him. The next day, I inquired at Wu Xiaoyu's delivery station. Sure enough, he had resigned long ago, and no one knew where he had gone. So I officially gave up on the lead and turned to Zhang Yan's parents. They lived in an old shantytown in the city, in a house over 30 years old. I brought some fruit and nervously knocked on the door. An elderly man with graying hair, a stooped posture, and a gloomy complexion opened the door. I was surprised because, according to that information, Zhang Yan's father was not yet 60, but the elderly man before me looked over 70. It must have been the grief that aged him. With a hoarse voice, he asked who I was looking for. Feeling guilty, I handed over the fruit and introduced myself. Bang! A cup fell to the floor from the inner room. Zhang Yan's parents' house was only about 40 to 50 square meters, with a bedroom and a living room, but you could see Zhang Yan's mother struggling to sit up in bed. It was her who had thrown the cup. "Get out!" Upon hearing my identity, Zhang Yan's father's eyes bulged, and his face turned red. He threw the fruit out and grabbed a broom. "We don't want anything. We just want our daughter back, or else a life for a life." I quickly dodged outside before the broom could hit me. Zhang Yan's father slammed the door shut. Through the door, I dared to raise my voice slightly, shouting inside, "Mr. Zhang, your daughter is gone, and nothing can bring her back. According to the law, the driver will face a maximum of 3 years. It would be better to discuss compensation, at least to provide some support for you and your wife." The door swung open again. This time, Zhang Ye's father's bloodshot eyes and the kitchen knife in his hand greeted me. I swiftly ran downstairs, stopping to catch my breath only after reaching the street. It seemed Zhang Yan's parents were also not an option. I smiled bitterly, realizing Fan Ping could only rely on his luck. But that evening, I unexpectedly received a call from Wu Xiaoyu. "You went to see my father-in-law?" he asked bluntly. I said yes, explaining that I was the attorney representing the case. "Although I sympathize with your family's plight, my job requires me to follow legal procedures. I hope you understand." He remained silent on the other end. Just as I worried he might hang up, he spoke again. "Come to my house. Don't disturb them anymore. You know where it is." He hung up, and I immediately drove to his house. Wu Xiaoyu was squatting not far from his home. When I arrived, I was shocked when I saw him. Even before getting close, I smelled a strong odor of smoke, and the ground was littered with cigarette butts. His eyes were deeply sunken, his hair greasy and tangled, and his stubble was almost white, but his protruding eyes were strikingly bright, like a nocturnal animal, constantly watching for potential prey. I extended my hand as a courtesy. He ignored me, stood up, and opened the door. The moment the light came on, I was struck by a sense of illusion. The house, though a rented flat, was exceptionally cozy. Besides the homely atmosphere, I could feel the family's anticipation and joy for the new life. I even glimpsed the baby crib in the inner room, and various baby supplies scattered around. The place was spotless, as if the lady of the house still cleaned it daily. What shattered this illusion was the black and white portrait in the living room and the incense ash before it. Wu Xiaoyu stood still, staring at his wife's portrait. I felt awkward sitting down and didn't know where to start. So I took 3 sticks of incense from the pile and asked if I could light them for Zhang Yan. He glanced at me without speaking, handing me a lighter. After lighting the incense, I cleared my throat, but Wu Xiaoyu spoke first. "My in-laws are in poor health. Don't disturb them. They've endured a lifetime of hardship and don't care about money. Just don't upset them further." Understanding his implication, I agreed. "But what about you? You're still young. Although your wife's situation is tragic and none of us wanted this outcome, it's irreparable now. You said the driver would only get a maximum of 3 years. Wu Xiaoyu interrupted, sensing the danger in his eyes. I lowered my voice, feeling guilty. According to the law, yes, a traffic accident causing 1 death is punishable by up to 3 years in prison. 3 years? My wife and child's lives are worth just 3 years. His eyes turned red, and I stopped speaking, afraid to tell him that if the driver wasn't found liable for the accident, he might even escape criminal charges. But he had already seen through my hesitation. That's if the driver is at fault. Right, if the driver can prove he didn't violate traffic rules or get a letter of understanding from the family, he won't even go to jail. I nodded, realizing he had researched the law. Given this, I didn't need to be subtle, so I took out the documents from my briefcase, ready to get straight to the point. But he stopped me with his eyes. He stared at me like an angry lion, speaking deliberately. But my wife was murdered. My heart skipped a beat. I had assumed he was ready to negotiate, even interpreting his hidden intentions. I thought his previous actions were to get better terms and control the compensation money. But his final words hit me like a punch. If there was hidden truth in this case, it overturned all previous judgments. I asked what he meant, what else the client had told me. Wu Xiaoyu turned to his wife's portrait. My wife wasn't dead when she was sent to the hospital. She died less than 5 minutes after being taken to the operating room. The doctor told me that if she had been brought in 20 minutes earlier, she might have had a good chance of surviving. Maybe even the baby could have been saved. At this point, tears finally flowed uncontrollably from his eyes. 20 minutes, 2 lives. What else could it be but murder? I was speechless. I had expected some thrilling conspiracy, only to find it was his imagination. Still, I understood his feelings. I reviewed the files. The accident happened at 11:13 am. The driver called the police immediately, and the ambulance arrived in 8 minutes. At 11:33, the ambulance brought your wife to the hospital. At 11:39, the doctor declared Zhang Yan dead. Mr. Wu, while the doctor's words might be true, the timeline. Bullshit. Wu Xiaoyu suddenly screamed hysterically. He kept throwing papers at me while reciting memorized details, as if venting long-suppressed emotions. My wife had a prenatal checkup at 9:30 am. At 9:45 am, I took her to the bus stop. At 9:48 am, she boarded the bus. At 10:21 am, she got off the bus. The bus stop is 1,127 meters from the accident site. I walked 1,821 steps at a leisurely pace, taking 14 minutes and 37 seconds. Even if she walked slowly, double the time, it wouldn't exceed 29 minutes. She would have reached the accident site by 10:50 at the latest. So why was the police called only at 11:13? His voice was filled with bone-deep hatred as he spoke the last sentence. The papers he threw were crumpled sheets covered in numbers. I finally understood where he had been the past few days. Each number had likely been verified countless times. I admired his determination, but legally, those numbers meant almost nothing. I gently told him that if he believed there was hidden truth, he should report it to the police. I did, but they said it's just my speculation, without solid evidence. I sighed. That's true. Your reasoning is based on ideal conditions. No one knows what might have happened on the way. Maybe she dropped something and went back to pick it up. Maybe she got tired and rested for a while. Patting his shoulder, I consoled him. Zhang Yan is gone. Don't make things too hard for yourself unless you can find solid evidence. He suddenly looked up, his bloodshot eyes staring at me. I have evidence. Wu Xiaoyu's so-called evidence was the testimony of an elderly man nearby. Because of the remote location, he had searched the 2 kilometers around the accident site and found someone who vaguely remembered the incident. The old man was collecting things in his yard, about 300 meters from the scene, when he heard the screeching of car brakes. Because of the rain, the sound was unclear, and he couldn't see what happened over the yard wall. The old man noted the time when he returned home, just before 11. So, the car braking likely occurred before 10:50. I went to the police station to discuss it. The police were also sympathetic to Wu Xiaoyu's situation. He had told them everything he had told me, including the old man's testimony. But as I expected, his claims were merely his personal conjectures. Only Zhang Yan's bus boarding and alighting times were verifiable. The rest couldn't be proven. The key testimony of the old man couldn't be used, as he didn't directly witness the accident. The police told me Wu Xiaoyu had originally accompanied Zhang Yan to her prenatal checkup, but had to leave because of a call from his company due to a surge in orders because of the rain. He had wanted to take Zhang Yan home or let her take a taxi, but she insisted she was fine, as the doctor had advised her to walk more and urged Wu Xiaoyu to go to work. In the end, they both tried to save money and make more in preparation for the baby. But tragedy struck unexpectedly. Perhaps driven by guilt, Wu Xiaoyu had developed this obsession with finding another cause for the accident to make up for his wife. I was silent for a long time after hearing this. No matter what, everything returned to the starting point. After returning from the police station, I went to Mr. Wang. I explained the current situation to him. With only a week left before the trial, and the victim's family still very emotional, obtaining the letter of understanding would be challenging. Mr. Wang wasn't surprised by this outcome. He seemed to have known it would be difficult to make progress with Wu Xiaoyu and his family, and had come to me as a last resort. Mr. Wang only asked if the 3-year sentence was still likely and if there would be any complications. I assured him that based on the police investigation, there was no evidence of the driver's traffic violations. Even without the letter of understanding, the sentence would likely be under 3 years. Mr. Wang nodded, unable to show his happiness in front of me, but clearly satisfied with the outcome. I took the opportunity to probe him, briefly explaining Wu Xiaoyu's speculation. I subtly asked, the other party doubts the accident's timing. If we can provide evidence showing no delay, they might sign the letter of understanding. No, Mr. Wang firmly denied. By all accounts, I had done everything I could for this case. The outcome was predictable and acceptable to the client, but I still felt an inexplicable unease. 2 days before the trial, I visited the detention center. Fan Ping's demeanor was vastly different from our last meeting. Previously, he was anxious and fearful. Now, he seemed prepared for his fate. I updated him on the situation. When I mentioned the likely sentence of under 3 years, his face showed relief similar to Mr. Wen's. He had already prepared himself. Thank you, Attorney Dao. He was polite, making me feel guilty. I hadn't achieved anything or succeeded in getting the letter of understanding. I told him that if we could prove he hadn't violated traffic rules, he might avoid criminal charges altogether. I had a hunch and asked if there was any dashcam footage that could serve as evidence. No, that car never had a dashcam, he replied firmly. I was surprised, not just by his resolute answer, which matched Mr. Wen's, but because his response didn't align with Mr. Wen's account. By now, they were prepared for the worst, but why were they so secretive about this? An electric shock seemed to pass through my brain. I couldn't grasp it, but instinctively asked Fan Ping, if there's no evidence, getting the victim's family's understanding letter might also help you avoid jail time, but they're fixated on the accident's timing. 2. You recall any other vehicles or witnesses who can verify this? No. Fan Ping's rejection was even more decisive. I noticed a fleeting unnaturalness in his face. He looked away, showing signs of panic. Thank you, Attorney Dao, for considering so much for my case. I've thought it over. I've caused a big disaster, and any punishment is minor compared to her loss. Besides, the boss promised I'd still have a job when I get out, so I'm at ease. Thank you, Attorney Dao. You've done enough. I'll leave it to fate. Fan Ping's lengthy speech made his intentions clear, but leaving the detention center, my doubts grew stronger. Could there really be more to this case? The day before the trial, I reviewed all the case materials, confirming Fan Ping's statements were airtight, except for Wu Xiaoyu's baseless speculations. Specializing in economic cases, I wasn't well versed in criminal law, and this was primarily a police matter. Even if I had ideas, I had no means to act on them. Suddenly, I wondered if that was why Mr. Wang had approached me. Shaking off the thought, I reminded myself it wasn't my concern and stuck to my duties. Yet, I couldn't shake the image of Wu Xiaoyu's bloodshot eyes from my mind. Just as I was about to leave work, our law firm received an unexpected guest. Wu Xiaoyu had come to see me, and what he said shocked me. I'll sign the letter of understanding. Please defend the driver as not guilty. The next day in court, presenting the letter of understanding caused quite a stir. Mr. Wang and Fan Ping were incredulous. Zhang Yan's father and his wife in a wheelchair jumped up, accusing me of forgery. Only Wu Xiaoyu, sitting quietly, didn't speak. From the start of the trial, his eyes never left Fan Ping. The judge verified the letter's authenticity. Wu Xiaoyu admitted he had signed it. Zhang Yan's parents turned on him, cursing for betraying his wife and child's lives. But legally, a letter of understanding from any immediate family member is valid. The judge ruled that given no evidence of Fan Ping's traffic violations, his positive post-accident behavior and remorse, and with the family's understanding, he was exempt from criminal charges and released immediately. After the trial, I lied to Mr. Wang, saying the letter was obtained that morning. I claimed a last-minute effort succeeded as the family came around. Mr. Wang and Fan Ping were thrilled to avoid penalties. They thanked me profusely, and Mr. Wang gave me a generous red envelope. I didn't refuse, but my eyes caught sight of Wu Xiaoyu and Zhang Yan's parents, already gone. Back at the law firm, I wrapped up the case procedures, concluding the matter. But I knew it wasn't over. Another chapter was unfolding somewhere. 2 weeks later, the police contacted me, asking if I had seen Fan Ping. I said I hadn't since the trial ended. I asked what was wrong. They told me Fan Ping was missing 3 days ago. He vanished without a trace. His disappearance naturally linked back to the previous case, so the police investigated Zhang Yan's family. They found her parents had quickly sold their house for a low price after the trial. The insurance compensation was received 10 days post-trial. The day after the payout, Fan Ping went missing. Zhang Yan's parents and Wu Xiaoyu also vanished. Now all subjects of a police search, but without results. Feigning shock, I told the police Wu Xiaoyu signing the letter made me think he had come to terms. Unexpectedly, the police turned the focus on me, asking a sharp question. We found out Wu Xiao Yu visited your office the day before the trial. You spent a long time with him. Why did you tell Mr. Wang the letter was signed that morning? What did you and Wu Xiao Yu discuss that night? Mr. Wang, my client in this case, seeing the police's serious demeanor, I laughed bitterly, explaining the letter was signed that night. Wu Xiao Yu and I discussed the pros and cons of signing. Finishing late, I forgot to inform Mr. Wang. Feeling embarrassed the next day, I made up an excuse. Is this a big deal? Unexpectedly, the police pressed further. Attorney Dao, you've been practicing for 7 or 8 years. Would you forget something this important? I laughed awkwardly. I forgot. What else? Does it matter? When I told him, suddenly, I realized something. Turning pale, are you suggesting I colluded with Wu Xiao Yu? I barely know him. Why would I risk my years of legal career for him? The police stared at me for a moment, then relaxed slightly. They recorded my statements and left. After they left, I closed the door and Saturday on the sofa, lighting a cigarette, deep in thought. That night, I Saturday in the same place, with Wu Xiao Yu across from me. He said he would sign the letter, ask me to defend Fan Ping as not guilty, and ensure his release. I asked why. He was silent for a long time until his cigarette burned out. Pressing out the butt, he looked at me with wild eyes. I want a rematch with him. Wu Xiao Yu said he was willing to gamble with himself. The 20-minute delay had cost Zhang Yan's life. Though he knew he might never find evidence, he understood his wife. Recalling Mr. Wang and Fan Ping's attitudes about the dashcam, I didn't refute him, but I knew that device was likely gone. So I asked, what's your plan? Nah, the only one who knows the truth is Fan Ping. If he goes to jail, it's 1 to 3 years. I can't wait that long. So I need him outside. I was startled, knowing his implication. I asked what he intended. He looked at me and asked if I was sure I wanted to know. I immediately fell silent. He was more determined than I imagined, willing to abandon everything for the truth. He was unafraid, having closed the door to his future when Zhang Yan died. We were silent for a long time before he promised, don't worry, I have my limits. If I'm wrong, I'll control the situation and turn myself in. My mind replayed those crumpled papers full of numbers. After years in this field, I knew the law sometimes. A strange feeling of admiration surged in me, and I chose to stand by him. I had one question. Wu Xiao Yu, aren't you afraid of telling me this? Why trust me? Because you closed your eyes when lighting incense for Zhang Yan. Attorney Dao, I bet you're an upright person. I believe in you. Opening my eyes, the memory ended. The timing of the letter was a minor mistake that the police seized upon. I smiled bitterly. If they had been this sensitive about the accident's timing, things might have been different, but it didn't matter. As long as I insisted it was a mistake, they couldn't touch me. The next day, the police called me again for another statement, asking me to repeat my conversation with Wu Xiao Yu. I knew their purpose. Having handled a few criminal cases, I understood police tactics. 2 identical testimonies would indicate premeditation. No normal person can perfectly repeat a conversation twice. I made my statement, then saw Mr. Wang. He looked tense and had aged noticeably since Fan Ping's disappearance. He kept telling the police he feared for his safety. The police asked what it had to do with him. He was speechless, saying he was just worried about the company's reputation. Seeing me, Mr. Wang looked uneasy. Then, as if remembering something, he angrily asked why the letter's timing didn't match. I gave him the same old excuse, dismissing it as a minor issue, but I took the opportunity to question him. Mr. Wang, why are you so nervous? You're not the one in trouble, right? Panic flashed across his face as he glanced around but remained silent. He said he was worried about Fan Ping's safety and feared retaliation against the company. I offered him a cigarette, and we walked to a secluded corner outside the police station. Mr. Wang, is there really no hidden issue with the accident? His eyes widened in anger. Attorney Dao, what do you mean? He then asked, what did Wu Xiao Yu tell you that night? I sighed. Mr. Wang, I thought you might have forgotten something important. His face darkened, on the verge of erupting. Before he could, I advised him one last time. Mr. Wang, if there's anything you forgot to mention, tell me now while there's still time. Returning to the office, I waited until 10 p.m. But Mr. Wang never contacted me. I had lost the gamble. I had promised Wu Xiao Yu that I didn't know his plans. But if something strange happened and lasted more than 3 days, it meant he had succeeded. I asked what he would do if he won. He didn't answer, showing me his phone with a picture of his pregnant wife. Thinking it over, I said, I understand you, but trust the law. It's for your own good. If you succeed, give me a day to get you justice. If you're right, more people might know the truth. If I still fail, I won't stop you. Wu Xiao Yu looked at his wife's picture for a long time and agreed. Mr. Wang didn't contact me overnight, but the next morning, the police summoned me again. This time, the situation changed. The police had received something, a memory card. The card contained a video of Fan Ping's tear-streaked face. He was bruised and bleeding, clearly tortured. He confessed something unimaginable. He wasn't the one who hit Zhang Yan. It was Mr. Wang. Because Mr. Wang had been drinking, he had Fan Ping take the fall. Mr. Wang promised Fan Ping 500,000 yuan, and permanent employment. Fan Ping had to serve up to 3 years in prison. The accident occurred around 10:45 to 10:50 am. Mr. Wang delayed calling the police by at least 23 minutes, waiting for Fan Ping. Most outrageously, Mr. Wang's reason was to protect his son's future government job prospects. I couldn't help but curse down his job prospects. Those 23 minutes cost lives. Mr. Wang was immediately taken by the police for investigation. During the investigation, Mr. Wang mentioned our conversation and accused me of colluding with Wu Xiaoyu. The police noted my suggestive comments, but couldn't charge me without proof. Having dealt with the law for years, such minor issues didn't affect me. The police thoroughly investigated me, finding no connection with Wu Xiaoyu. Crucially, I was unaware of Wu Xiaoyu's plan. Eventually, the police gave up and turned to Mr. Wang. He had two choices: confess and face the law, or deny everything and hold out. But as long as he was free, Wu Xiaoyu would eventually find him. Mr. Wang chose to deny everything, unwilling to let his efforts go to waste. The police reopened the accident investigation, but still couldn't prove Mr. Wang was the driver. He hadn't paid the 500,000 yuan, and Fan Ping's testimony under duress wasn't enough. I realized Wu Xiaoyu had given me another gamble. Sadly, I lost again. Knowing Wu Xiaoyu was out there, the police couldn't catch him. His years of delivery work made him adept at navigating the city and avoiding cameras. They found Zhang Ye's parents, who had moved back to their hometown. Wu Xiaoyu gave them all the money, ensuring their financial security, but they knew nothing of his whereabouts. Learning of Wu Xiaoyu's actions, Zhang Yan's father was tearful, offering to serve his sentence. The police empathetically left them in peace. Fan Ping remained missing, but I believed he was safe. Only Mr. Wang lived in constant fear, seeing everyone as Wu Xiaoyu's accomplice. I realized this might be his punishment. A week after receiving the video, Wu Xiaoyu acted again. Mr. Wang's son was taken by a taxi and had returned. Mr. Wang was under police protection, so Wu Xiaoyu couldn't act, but his son, an adult, was left vulnerable. I had a feeling it was either a mistake or a deliberate oversight. The police traced the taxi, confirming Wu Xiaoyu was the driver. They quickly found the abandoned taxi, rented temporarily, leading them to Wu Xiaoyu's location. The police assembled, ready for a decisive action. They found Wu Xiaoyu 3 days after Mr. Wang's son disappeared, but no one was happy. Wu Xiaoyu was waiting for them, sitting calmly, smoking. He offered no resistance or surprise, and no clues about Fan Ping or Mr. Wang's son. Wu Xiaoyu confessed to kidnapping Fan Ping and Mr. Wang's son, but refused to disclose their locations. He only demanded to see Mr. Wang. Mr. Wang rushed to the interrogation room. Furious, the police restrained him as he struck Wu Xiaoyu. Mr. Wang demanded to know where his son was, threatening revenge if anything happened to him. Wu Xiaoyu's first words to Mr. Wang: "Your son's life matters, but what about my wife and child?" Restrained, Mr. Wang showed a mix of rage and fear. Finally, he begged, "What do you want? I'll give you money. Besides the insurance, I'll give you $1 million more." Wu Xiaoyu replied, "I want the truth. Justice for my wife and child." Mr. Wang gritted his teeth. His expression conflicted. The truth is what the court ruled. Fan Ping liked to save his skin. Wu Xiaoyu smiled, giving the police an email address. The email contained another video. Mr. Wang's son was tied to a bathtub with several buckets of water dripping into it. "I tested this many times. These buckets are enough to fill the tub. If you're late, he has 10 hours. Mr. Wang erupted in hysteria. "I didn't do it. What more do you want me to say?" He lunged forward, but the police held him back, and he suddenly collapsed. Kneeling, "I beg you, spare my son. I'll give you more money. 3 million. Wu Xiaoyu closed his eyes, silent. The police brought in veteran officers, but Wu Xiaoyu said nothing more. Finally, they thought of me, asking me to persuade him. I didn't refuse. Seeing him, I asked, "Why are you so sure?" Fan Ping told the truth. Wu Xiaoyu glanced at the one-way mirror, asking, "Do you still believe Mr. Wang is innocent?" I didn't answer, and he continued, "Attorney Dao, I'm sorry for exploiting your advice that night. I'll never forgive my wife and child's killer. As compensation, I offer you a chance for credit. Fan Ping's location is." The police burst in, trying to make him reveal Mr. Wang's son's whereabouts, but Wu Xiaoyu fell silent again. Based on his information, the police found Fan Ping. He was weak and unconscious, but not severely injured. The police hoped to get more leads from him, but he was too weak to speak. With only 4 hours left, the police were jubilant at rescuing Fan Ping and clearing my name. But regarding Mr. Wang and his son, they were conflicted. Rescuing hostages was their duty, but the key to saving Mr. Wang's son was Mr. Wang himself. I saw Mr. Wang surrounded by cigarette butts, his wife crying. Mr. Wang looked at me silently. I checked my watch. Mr. Wang, Wu Xiaoyu's timing might not be precise. Drowning takes less than 10 minutes. His eyes glared at me, filled with rage. At that moment, the police came again. They had found another memory card in Fan Ping's pocket. Mr. Wang was called urgently intently to see it. It showed his son tied to a chair, dead and terrified. The camera focused on his hands. Then it switched to a knife, cutting off his pinky finger. We found a human finger in Fan Ping's clothes, but DNA tests are needed to confirm it. Before the police finished, Mr. Wan's wife fainted. Mr. Wan finally broke down, crying. Mr. Wan confessed to all of Fan Ping's accusations. He admitted to being the driver and making Fan Ping take the fall, leading to Zhang Yan's delayed rescue and death. When the police informed Wu Xiaoyu, he remained defiant. He said he didn't trust them and wanted to see me. I confirmed Mr. Wan's confession. To prevent recanting, the police had him provide evidence. The dashcam memory card, though broken, was still at his home. Modern technology could easily restore its contents, so the evidence was irrefutable. Zhang Yan and her unborn child could finally rest in peace. Wu Xiaoyu's eyes turned red, and tears streamed down his face. Then he collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably. Subsequently, I provided pro bono defense for Wu Xiaoyu in 2 cases. One was his lawsuit against Mr. Wan as a victim's family member, and the other was his kidnapping charge. Fan Ping was sentenced to 3 years for taking the fall. Mr. Wan, for drunk driving causing death, fleeing the scene, and framing someone, was upgraded to murder and sentenced to death. Wu Xiaoyu was convicted of kidnapping, without intent to extort money, and causing no severe harm. He was sentenced to 5 years. After the sentencing, I visited Wu Xiaoyu in the detention center and saw him smile for the first time. He extended his hand, revealing for fingers. I cut off my pinky 3 weeks ago. No one noticed. I smiled back. This is the best outcome I can imagine. His expression turned serious. Thank you, Attorney Dao. I waved it off. I didn't help much. You gave yourself a chance. You were lucky to gamble on me being an upright lawyer. He blinked. I was talking about something else. I said nothing. Indeed, I hadn't helped much. I had just mused aloud that night. From a legal standpoint, as long as Mr. Wan denied everything, there was little to be done. Knowing him, he wouldn't confess until the end. To make him talk, it had to be an eye for an eye. This is a short story, and it ends here. I update my stories daily, so if you like them, please subscribe.